The Klingon Empire is often framed as a society built on honor, where warriors live by a code that elevates combat into ritual and transforms death into glory. The official story presents Klingons as proud, fierce, and uncompromising, a people whose cultural identity is inseparable from their martial prowess. But canon does not support that ideal. What the screens show, episode after episode, is a culture that consumes its own population with mechanical efficiency. Klingon society does not preserve its warriors, it spends them. The honor code does not protect Klingons from death, it justifies it, and the Empire does not reward loyalty with stability. It replaces stability with conflict, ensuring that every generation is ground down by the same structural pressures that destroyed the one before. This is not about individual failures. This is about a system that treats early death as inevitable, political survival as impossible, and internal violence as routine. The Klingon Empire does not function despite these patterns. It functions because of them. Honor is not the shield, it is the blade turned inward. The mechanism begins in childhood and accelerates until death. Klingon children are raised inside a framework that defines worth through combat capability and social rank. There is no protected developmental phase. Young Klingons are introduced to weaponry, physical training, and hierarchical violence early. In Birthright, Part 2, Worf teaches the descendants of Kitoma survivors to embrace their Klingon heritage, and the lessons revolve around combat readiness, ritual posture, and the language of dominance. These are children isolated from the Empire for decades, and yet Worf's instruction defaults immediately to martial preparation. He does not teach history or philosophy first, he teaches them how to fight. That is the baseline. Klingon identity is constructed around the expectation of violence, and that expectation begins before adolescence. By the time a Klingon reaches adulthood, they have internalized the logic that their value is measured by their ability to kill and their willingness to die. This is not metaphorical. Canon repeatedly shows that Klingons who cannot fight, or who are perceived as weak, lose status immediately. In ethics, Worf sustains a spinal injury that leaves him paralyzed, and his immediate response is to request ritual suicide. The injury does not threaten his intelligence, his judgment, or his loyalty. It threatens his ability to perform combat, and in Klingon terms, that renders his life valueless. His son, Alexander, is present during this moment, watching his father prepare to die rather than live without the capacity for violence. The cultural message is unmistakable. Weakness is not survivable. Injury is not recoverable. If you cannot fight, you have no place. That logic shapes every Klingon from childhood onward, and it creates a population that views their own lives as disposable the moment their combat utility declines. The education system mirrors this. Klingon youth are not trained in multiple disciplines with combat as one option among many. They are funneled toward the military. In Sons of Mog, Worf's brother Kurn explains that he has lost his position, his house, and his honor due to political fallout from Worf's actions against the Empire. Kurn's entire identity is tied to his rank and house affiliation, and when those are stripped away, he has no alternate path. There is no secondary career. There is no civilian infrastructure that values his skills outside the chain of command. He is left with nothing, and his response is to ask Worf to kill him. Worf refuses, and instead arranges for Kurn's memory to be erased and his identity replaced so that he can live as a different person in a different house. That is the only solution canon presents. Kurn cannot exist outside the military structure, so the structure itself must be overwritten. This is not an isolated case. Klingon society does not build systems that allow for reintegration, rehabilitation, or alternate contribution. If you fall outside the hierarchy, you are erased. If you cannot serve in combat, you are expendable. The culture does not create safety nets. It creates exit ramps. and those ramps lead to death. The pressure does not relent in adulthood, it intensifies. Klingon officers serve in a hierarchy where advancement is achieved through personal combat, political maneuvering, or the death of a superior. Promotion is not merit-based in the sense of competence or strategic success. It is conflict-based. In A Matter of Honor, Riker serves as first officer aboard the Klingon vessel Pag, and he observes that subordinates openly test their commanders, looking for weakness or hesitation that would justify a challenge. The system is designed to ensure that leadership is constantly contested. Stability is seen as stagnation. A captain who is never challenged is assumed to be weak. A subordinate who never challenges is seen as unambitious. This creates a command structure where trust is impossible. Every superior is a potential target, and every subordinate is a potential assassin. The result is that Klingon officers cannot focus entirely on external threats, because they are always managing internal ones. They cannot delegate authority without risk. They cannot show hesitation without inviting mutiny. And they cannot age gracefully, because age diminishes combat capability, and combat capability is the only metric that protects them from being replaced. Canon reinforces this through the recurring presence of older Klingons who have survived through political cunning rather than strength. Kor, Kang, and Koloth appear in Blood Oath as aging warriors who have outlived their prime, and they are openly treated as relics. Their past glories do not grant them continued respect. They are tolerated, not honored. When they embark on one final mission, it is framed as a chance to die in battle rather than fade into irrelevance. They do not seek retirement. They seek a meaningful death, because Klingon culture offers no dignified alternative to combat. Kor's death in Once More Unto the Breach makes the pattern explicit. He is suffering from memory loss, disorientation, and diminished cognitive function. His effectiveness as a warrior is gone. But instead of being cared for or respected for his decades of service, he is mocked by younger Klingons and barely tolerated by Martok. His final act is to charge alone into enemy fire, sacrificing himself so that the ship can escape. The death is framed as heroic, but the mechanism underneath is bleak. Kor had no other option. His culture gave him no role, no respect, and no value outside of dying gloriously. The Empire does not care for its veterans, it discards them. The Honor Code accelerates this process rather than slowing it. Honor, in Klingon terms, is not about moral integrity or ethical behavior. It is about adherence to ritual and the perception of strength. A Klingon can betray an ally, lie to a superior, or sabotage a rival, and as long as they are not caught or successfully challenged, their honor remains intact. But a Klingon who is defeated in combat, loses political standing, or is accused of dishonor by someone more powerful has no recourse. The accusation is the verdict. The loss is permanent. In Sins of the Father, Worf is accused of his father's treason at Khitomer. The accusation is false, manufactured by Duras to cover his own family's guilt, but the accusation is enough. Worf is stripped of his honor, his house is dissolved, and his family name is disgraced. The actual truth is irrelevant. The political mechanism of honor allows Duras to erase an entire lineage without proof, and the High Council permits it because exposing Duras would destabilize the Empire. Worf accepts the disgrace to prevent civil war, but the cost is total. His brother Kern loses his commission, his house, and eventually his identity. His family is functionally destroyed, not by combat or failure, but by political maneuvering disguised as honor enforcement. The system is designed to allow this. Honor is not a fixed ethical standard. It is a political weapon. It can be granted, revoked, or fabricated based on power dynamics rather than truth. And because the code is treated as sacred, there is no appeal. A Klingon who loses their honor loses their place in society, and Klingon society has no place for those outside the hierarchy. This is why Klingons die young. They are not dying because they are reckless. They are dying because the system requires constant turnover to maintain its internal logic. If advancement comes through combat, then someone must lose. If honor is contested, then someone must be dishonored. If leadership is proven through challenge, then leaders must eventually fall. The culture is structured around replacement, not preservation. Every warrior is temporary. Every house is vulnerable. Every position is contested, and the Empire ensures that external wars provide a steady outlet for this violence. The Klingon Empire is perpetually engaged in some form of conflict. In the 23rd century, they fight the Federation. In the 24th century, they fight the Cardassians, the Romulans, and eventually the Dominion. There is no extended peacetime. There are only brief pauses between wars, and those pauses are filled with internal power struggles. The Empire does not seek peace, it seeks targets, and when external targets are unavailable, the violence turns inward. This is visible in the Klingon Civil War during Redemption and Redemption 2. The war begins as a dispute over leadership succession, but it rapidly consumes the Empire. Entire fleets engage in combat. Entire houses are wiped out. The war lasts for months, and by the end, the damage to the Klingon military is severe enough that Gowron acknowledges the Empire's vulnerability to external threats. But the war was not about ideology or governance. It was about which faction would control the High Council. The stakes were personal power, and the cost was tens of thousands of Klingon lives. The pattern repeats. In the way of the warrior, Gowron's government collapses into paranoia over changeling infiltration, and the Klingons launch an unprovoked invasion of Cardassia. The invasion is a disaster. The Klingons take heavy casualties, destabilize the Alpha Quadrant, and gain nothing strategically. But Gowron remains in power because the war serves as a distraction from internal dissent. As long as Klingons are fighting externally, they are not fighting him. The war is not rational. It is a pressure valve. Later, Gowron becomes so obsessed with maintaining his political dominance that he deliberately sabotages the war effort against the Dominion. In Tacking into the Wind, he assigns General Martok to suicidal missions specifically to prevent Martok from becoming too popular. The Empire is losing the war, and Gowron is willing to sacrifice ships, troops, and strategic advantage to eliminate a political rival. Worf kills Gowron in single combat to stop this, and the High Council immediately accepts Martok as the new Chancellor. The transition is seamless because the system was designed for it. Leadership turnover through assassination is normal. It is expected. The Empire does not punish this. It institutionalizes it, and that institutionalization extends down to the family unit. Klingon houses operate as miniature versions of the Empire's political structure. Each house has a head, a hierarchy, and a set of subordinates who may challenge that head if they sense weakness. Family loyalty exists, but it is conditional. If a house leader is dishonored, disgraced, or defeated, their family suffers collectively. Children inherit their parents' honor status, their political alliances, and their enemies. A child born into a disgraced house has no path to redemption except through combat prowess so overwhelming that it forces the Empire to overlook their lineage. This is the trap Alexander finds himself in. As Worf's son, he inherits Worf's honor and Worf's disgrace. He is raised partially on the Enterprise, where he is sheltered from the full weight of Klingon culture, but when he attempts to integrate into that culture, he is rejected. In Firstborn, an older version of Alexander travels back in time to prevent his younger self from pursuing a diplomatic career, because in the future timeline, Alexander's refusal to embrace the warrior path results in his father's death. The adult Alexander has internalized the lesson that survival in Klingon society requires combat, and he attempts to force his younger self into that mold to prevent the same mistake. The lesson is clear. Klingon children are not free to choose their own paths. The culture punishes deviation. If you do not become a warrior, you are a liability. If you are a liability, you endanger your house, and if you endanger your house, you are expendable. The reproductive logic follows the same pattern. Klingon families are small. Canon rarely shows large extended families or multi-generational households. The birth rate appears low, and the cultural emphasis on combat ensures that many Klingons die before reproducing. In The House of Quark, Quark accidentally becomes involved in Klingon politics and discovers that entire houses can collapse due to lack of heirs. Grilka's house is on the verge of extinction because her husband is dead, she has no children, and rival houses are circling. The only way to preserve the house is for her to marry immediately, and the marriage is treated as a political transaction rather than a personal bond. This is not unusual. Klingon marriages are alliances, children are future warriors, love exists, but it is secondary to function. And because the culture treats death as inevitable and glorious, there is no incentive to prioritize population stability. The Empire does not need a growing population, it needs a renewable one. As long as enough Klingons survive to crew the ships and fight the wars, the system continues. The result is that individual Klingon lives are valued only insofar as they contribute to the Empire's immediate needs. There is no long-term investment in individual Klingons. There is no infrastructure designed to maximize lifespan, minimize casualties, or support those who can no longer fight. The Empire optimizes for turnover, and the culture frames that turnover as honorable. What appears from the outside as a proud warrior society functions from the inside as a meat grinder. The political structure guarantees this. The Klingon High Council operates through a combination of direct combat challenges, backroom deals, and assassination. Leadership is contested constantly, and the contestation is lethal. In Rightful Heir, the Empire faces a crisis of faith and legitimacy, and the solution is to clone Kahless and install him as a figurehead emperor while the High Council retains actual power. The move is cynical, but it works because the Klingon population is willing to accept symbolic leadership as long as the rituals are performed. The cloned Kahless has no real authority, but his presence stabilizes the government by providing a shared cultural icon. This reveals the mechanism clearly. The Klingon people do not govern themselves. They are governed by a small elite who manipulate cultural symbols to maintain power. The High Council members are not warriors in the sense of frontline combatants. They are politicians who use the warrior code to justify their authority while avoiding the personal risks that code demands. When Gowron is killed, it is not by a council member. It is by Worf, an outsider who has been repeatedly betrayed by the council and has no political ambitions. The council members themselves rarely engage in the challenges they claim to respect. The hypocrisy is embedded in the system. The honor code applies most harshly to those with the least power. A low-ranking warrior who loses a fight loses their honor, their position, and potentially their life. A council member who loses a political struggle can negotiate, retreat, or realign. The consequences are not symmetrical. The system protects the elite while exposing the rank and file to constant existential risk. And that risk extends to every interaction. Klingon diplomacy is structured around insult, threat, and the implication of violence. In The Undiscovered Country, Chancellor Gorkon is assassinated while attempting to negotiate peace with the Federation, and his murder nearly reignites the war. The conspiracy behind his death includes high-ranking Klingons who believe that peace would weaken the Empire by removing the external conflict that justifies internal discipline. The conspirators are willing to kill their own Chancellor and frame the Federation for it because they understand that the Empire's political structure depends on war. Without an external enemy, the Klingons turn on each other. The civil war after Gorkon's death proves this. The conspiracy collapses, peace is achieved, and within a generation, the Empire experiences another civil war, this time over succession. The pattern is consistent. Peace is destabilizing. War is stabilizing. The Empire cannot function in a state of prolonged peace because its internal logic requires an outlet for the violence that structures every aspect of Klingon life. This is why the alliance with the Federation is fragile. The two governments have fundamentally incompatible models. The Federation seeks to minimize casualties, maximize diplomacy, and avoid conflict whenever possible. The Klingon Empire treats casualties as acceptable, diplomacy as weakness, and conflict as necessary. The alliance works only when there is a shared enemy large enough to override those differences. The Dominion War provides that enemy. But even during the war, Gowron's government nearly sabotages the alliance multiple times because the political pressures inside the Empire push toward aggression and distrust. Martok's rise to power temporarily stabilizes the government, but the mechanism remains. Martok is respected because he earned his position through combat, survived imprisonment by the Dominion, and demonstrated loyalty to his subordinates. But his leadership is only as secure as his ability to fight. When he ages, when he slows, when he shows weakness, the challenges will begin again. The system has no mechanism for graceful leadership transitions. It only has mechanisms for violent ones. The military structure mirrors this. Klingon Defense Force ships operate with minimal redundancy, aggressive engagement doctrines, and a command style that prioritizes honor over tactical flexibility. In rules of engagement, Worf is put on trial for destroying a civilian transport during combat, and the trial reveals that Klingon rules of engagement are far looser than Starfleet's. Klingon captains are expected to fire first, press the attack, and prioritize aggression over verification. The doctrine assumes that hesitation is more dangerous than error, and that killing an innocent target is preferable to allowing an enemy to escape. This produces a military that is effective in direct combat but brittle under sustained pressure. Klingon ships take heavy casualties in the Dominion War, and the Empire suffers significant fleet losses. In Sacrifice of Angels, the Klingon reinforcements arrive just in time to prevent a Federation defeat, but the cost is high. Klingon ships are destroyed in large numbers, and the survivors are immediately redeployed without pause. There is no recovery period. There is no rotation to allow damaged ships to repair or exhausted crews to rest. The fleet operates at maximum intensity until ships are destroyed or the war ends. The same logic applies to ground combat. Klingon soldiers are trained for close-quarters melee, direct assault, and shock tactics. They are not trained for siege warfare, insurgency, suppression, or occupation. In Nor the Battle to the Strong, Jake Sisko witnesses a Klingon assault on a Federation medical facility, and the Klingon tactics are straightforward. They attack directly, take heavy casualties, and withdraw when the position proves too costly. There is no adaptation, no flanking maneuver, no attempt to minimize losses. The attack is a test of will, and when the defenders hold, the Klingons move on. This is not incompetence. This is doctrine. The Klingon military does not optimize for efficiency, it optimizes for aggression. The goal is not to minimize casualties. The goal is to demonstrate strength through willingness to accept casualties. A commander who preserves their forces by retreating is seen as weak. A commander who takes heavy losses but holds the line is seen as honorable. The incentive structure pushes every engagement toward maximum violence, regardless of strategic value. The result is a military that consumes its personnel at an unsustainable rate. The Klingon population is not large. The Empire controls fewer worlds than the Federation or the Romulan Star Empire. The industrial base is smaller, the resource pool is shallower, and yet the Empire maintains a military doctrine that treats soldiers as expendable. The math does not work in the long term. The Klingons are spending their population faster than they can replace it, and the culture frames that expenditure as honorable. The only way the system persists is through conquest and incorporation. The Empire absorbs defeated species, presses them into service, and uses them to fill the gaps. But those incorporated populations are not given equal status. They are second-class citizens, subject to Klingon authority but excluded from the honor system. They serve in the military, but they do not benefit from it. They die in Klingon wars, but their deaths are not honored. The Empire extracts labor and lives from its subject populations without offering them the cultural rewards that supposedly justify Klingon sacrifice. This creates a multi-tiered society where ethnic Klingons occupy the top, subject species occupy the middle, and the disgraced occupy the bottom. Mobility between tiers is possible but rare. A non-Klingon can earn a measure of respect through exceptional service, but they will never be fully integrated. A disgraced Klingon can theoretically redeem themselves, but the mechanism for redemption is narrow and lethal. Most disgraced Klingons simply die, either through suicide, political assassination, or reckless combat. The psychological cost is invisible but pervasive. Every Klingon grows up knowing that their life is conditional. They know that injury ends status. They know that political defeat ends lineage. They know that their children will inherit their enemies, their debts, and their dishonor. And they know that the only culturally acceptable response to failure is death. This creates a population that is perpetually anxious, perpetually performing, and perpetually aware that they are one mistake away from erasure. Worf's arc across multiple series illustrates this. He is raised by humans, educated in Starfleet, and trained to value Federation principles. But he is also Klingon, and he is constantly pulled between two incompatible systems. In Starfleet, he is valued for his competence, his loyalty, and his judgment. In the Empire, he is judged by his house status, his combat record, and his willingness to conform to ritual. He is disgraced, reinstated, disgraced again, and reinstated again. He loses his brother, his son's respect, and his sense of identity multiple times. By the end of Deep Space Nine, he has killed a sitting chancellor, married into a political house, and accepted a position as Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire. But the tension never resolves. Worf is never fully Starfleet, and he is never fully Klingon. He exists in the gap between the two systems, and that gap is where he is most effective. He understands both, and he can navigate both, but he cannot fully belong to either. His life is a constant negotiation between incompatible values, and the negotiation never ends. That is the reality for every Klingon who survives long enough to think critically about their culture. They either accept the system and die within it, or they reject the system and are expelled from it. There is no third option. The Empire does not tolerate dissent, and the Honor Code does not permit reform. A Klingon who questions the warrior path is seen as weak. A Klingon who proposes alternatives is seen as a traitor. The culture is self-sealing, and the seal is enforced through violence. Which brings the analysis to the final mechanism. The Klingon Empire survives not because it is strong, but because it is willing to spend strength recklessly. It survives not because it protects its people, but because it replaces them constantly. And it survives not because the Honor Code produces better outcomes, but because the Honor Code justifies worse ones. Every Klingon child is taught that death in battle is glorious. But canon shows that most Klingons do not die in glorious single combat against worthy enemies. They die in ship explosions, political purges, and random skirmishes. They die because a superior officer made a mistake, because a rival fabricated an accusation, or because the Empire needed a target and they were available. The deaths are not meaningful. They are not heroic. They are simply deaths, reframed by ritual into something the survivors can accept. The ritual does not change the outcome. It only changes the narrative. A Klingon dies, and their family says they died with honor. But the family is still broken. The house is still weakened. The Empire is still diminished. The honor code does not prevent these losses. It just makes them easier to tolerate. And tolerance is the mechanism. As long as Klingons accept that early death is honorable, they will not demand a system that prevents early death. As long as they believe that political instability is a test of strength, they will not build institutions that provide stability. As long as they frame constant war as necessary, they will not seek peace. The culture is designed to perpetuate itself by making its own failures seem like virtues. This is why Klingon society appears static across centuries. The uniforms change, the ships improve, and the political figures rotate, but the core structure remains identical. Klingons in the 23rd century live and die the same way Klingons in the 24th century do. The honor code does not evolve, the political system does not reform, the military doctrine does not adapt. The Empire is locked in place by its own ideology, and that ideology ensures that every generation repeats the same patterns. The Kitoma Accords are the Empire's one attempt to break the cycle, and the attempt nearly destroys the government. The peace treaty with the Federation is opposed by powerful factions within the Empire, and those factions attempt to sabotage it through assassination, conspiracy, and eventually open war. The treaty survives, but the opposition never fully disappears. There are always Klingons who believe that peace is weakness, that alliance is betrayal, and that the Empire's survival depends on constant conflict. They are not wrong within the logic of their own system. The Klingon Empire was built for war. Its political structure requires war. Its honor code glorifies war. And its population has been conditioned for generations to see war as the natural state of existence. Peace is the aberration. Peace is the threat. Peace removes the external pressure that holds the Empire together, and without that pressure, the Empire collapses inward. The Dominion War saves the Empire from this collapse. The alliance with the Federation provides a shared enemy, a shared goal, and a shared victory. But the war also costs the Empire heavily. Thousands of Klingon ships are destroyed. Tens of thousands of Klingon warriors die. Entire fleets are wiped out. And by the end of the war, the Empire is weakened, exhausted, and dependent on Federation support to rebuild. The pattern is clear. The Klingon Empire cannot sustain prolonged high-intensity conflict without external assistance. Its doctrine is too aggressive, its logistics too shallow, and its population too small. The Empire spends its strength faster than it can regenerate, and the only thing that prevents total collapse is the fact that the Federation absorbs most of the Dominion's attention. If the Klingons had fought the Dominion alone, they would have lost. This is the truth beneath the warrior myth. The Klingon Empire is not powerful because its people are fearless. It is vulnerable because its people are expendable. The honor code does not make Klingons stronger. It makes them easier to sacrifice. And the political system does not reward loyalty. It punishes survival. Every Klingon who lives long enough becomes a problem. They accumulate knowledge, influence, and the ability to see through the rituals. They become harder to control, harder to replace, and harder to justify sacrificing. The system prefers young warriors who are eager, expendable, and too inexperienced to question the structure. The system prefers rapid turnover, constant replacement, and a population that never stabilizes long enough to demand change. The Klingon Empire is not a society that honors its warriors. It is a society that consumes them. The honor code is not a shield. It is a mechanism of control, and the promise of glory is not a reward. It is a justification for loss. Klingons are not doomed because they are warriors. They are doomed because their culture treats doom as the goal. Every ritual, every tradition, every expectation funnels them toward early death, political expendability, and endless conflict. The system is not broken. The system is working exactly as designed. It produces a steady supply of warriors willing to die, a hierarchy willing to spend them, and a population willing to call it honor. The tragedy is not that Klingons die young. The tragedy is that they die believing the system that killed them was worth preserving.